Your sister will live in your apartment, my parents announced during our family dinner. I stayed silent and just let them talk. 1 week later, they showed up, car packed, but I wasn't the one who was waiting inside. Hey, Reddit. At family dinner, my parents sat across from me with matching smug expressions, like they'd already won an argument I hadn't even been invited to. My younger sister, Emma, twirled her hair and scrolled through her phone, completely unbothered. That alone should have tipped me off that something was brewing. Then my father looked up from his plate, cleared his throat, and said the words that made my stomach turn. Your sister will live in your apartment. Just like that. Like it was a given. Like my apartment. The one I busted my butt to afford, furnish, and maintain was their property to assign. I blinked. My mom jumped in before I could speak. It'll only be temporary, she said, dabbing her lips with a napkin like we were discussing the weather. She just needs a place while she figures herself out. You're barely home anyway. It makes sense. Emma didn't look up. Not once. I took a slow sip of my wine and kept my face calm. I've learned over the years that if you give my parents an inch, they bulldoze the entire neighborhood. So I let them talk, let them lay out their little plan like it was some favor they were doing me by letting my sister squat in my place rent-free. Apparently, Emma had dropped out of her third university program, gotten into a fight with her roommate, and my parents were just exhausted. They were going on a 2-month cruise and didn't want her alone at their house. Too many parties, too much liability. So instead, they decided to make her my problem. I didn't agree. I didn't say yes. I didn't even nod. I just said, that's a bold plan. My dad smiled like that meant I was on board. My mom patted my hand. Emma rolled her eyes and asked if we were done so she could leave. That was Saturday. By the next Friday, I got the text. On our way. Be there in 20. Have dinner ready. I stared at my phone, standing in the middle of my own living room. My blood felt like it froze in my veins. They actually did it. They were coming to drop her off like I was some halfway house. I didn't respond. I didn't have to because I wasn't going to be the one waiting inside when they showed up. Let me rewind a bit. 3 years ago, I bought my own 2-bedroom apartment in the city. I worked 2 jobs, saved like crazy. And when I finally got that place, I poured every ounce of myself into making it mine, a small haven. I paid the mortgage, utilities, and everything else on my own. My parents always made it clear they thought I was cold, selfish, not family-oriented. Just because I refused to hand over my hard-earned peace to accommodate Emma's chaos. She's the golden child, the dramatic one, the one who always needs saving. They've bailed her out of every disaster she's created. And now that they were finally taking some time for themselves, they decided to dump her on me like I owed it to them, except I had other plans. The moment I got that text, I packed a single bag, locked up the apartment, and left, but not before making one final arrangement. See, I'd recently been renting out my spare room on a housing forum for traveling nurses and students. A quiet, respectful student named Lila had reached out earlier that week, desperate for a place after her campus dorm caught fire. She was moving in next month, but I called her that night and said she could come early. She arrived Thursday. She had the keys, and she knew exactly who to expect at the door Friday evening. The plan was simple. I left. She settled in. And when my parents and Emma arrived ready to play house, they'd be met by a complete stranger instead of their obedient daughter. And just like that, I went no contact. I didn't answer calls. I didn't reply to texts. I drove out of the city and spent the weekend with an old friend, sipping tea on her balcony, phone on silent. By Sunday evening, the messages started piling in. What the hell is going on? Why is there someone else living here? This is your apartment. What is wrong with you? I didn't respond, and Monday came. More texts. You embarrassed us. You humiliated your sister. You knew we were coming. Still nothing. By Wednesday, the tone changed. We just want to talk. Please come home. We can fix this. But I wasn't interested in fixing anything because nothing was broken on my end. For the first time in years, I felt in control. Not cruel, not vindictive, just done. I didn't need to explain myself. They never asked me what I wanted. They just assumed I'd fall in line like always. They were wrong. And, Emma, she finally called me herself. "You're so messed up," she spat. I had to sleep in the car the first night. Do you know how dangerous that was? I didn't answer her either because the truth was I did know. I knew exactly how hard life could be when someone refuses to help you. I'd lived it while she coasted. Maybe it was time she learned, and deep down, I think even she knew it. I stayed away from my apartment for a week. When I came back, Lila had already made herself at home in the second bedroom. She left me flowers on the counter and a thank you note. The apartment felt calm again, lighter. My parents eventually stopped calling, or maybe they realized the version of me they thought they could control was gone. What they didn't know was that this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment rebellion. This had been building for years, and it wasn't over yet. Because when I got back to work the next day, there was one more surprise waiting. My sister had filed a complaint against me. The HR email popped up in my inbox at 10:02 a.m. I had just sat down at my desk with a fresh coffee and was mentally preparing for a brutal project meeting. Instead, I was being called in for a mandatory review due to a formal complaint filed by a family member alleging that I'd wrongfully evicted them from a shared property. My stomach dropped. It was Emma. She listed herself as a cohabitating relative and claimed I'd orchestrated an illegal lockout. There was no shared property, no cohabitation, and certainly no eviction. She had never lived in my apartment. She never had a lease. She wasn't on any document, not even an overnight guest, but she was desperate and petty. And unfortunately, HR was required to investigate the moment it touched on harassment or potential workplace policy violations, no matter how ridiculous. I sat through a 20-minute meeting trying to explain that I didn't live with my sister, that the apartment was fully mine, purchased years ago under my name only. And that this was retaliation because I refused to house her while my parents went on vacation. To HR's credit, they didn't seem to buy her story, but they also made it clear that any continued personal drama spilling into work would result in further review. So I walked out of that meeting angry, embarrassed, and more certain than ever that this had never just been about the apartment. Emma didn't want a place to stay. She wanted control, just like our parents always gave her. And when I denied her that control, she escalated hard. By the time I got home that evening, there was another surprise waiting. A handwritten note slid under my front door. No envelope. Just 5 sloppy lines scribbled in permanent marker. "You humiliated me. You think you're better. You're not. You're just mean. This isn't over." I stood there reading it for a while, just holding it in my hand. No apology. No accountability. No sign she even understood what boundaries were. Lila, my new tenant, peeked her head out of her room with a cautious smile. "That your sister again?" I nodded. She winced and offered me half of her pizza. "You need carbs after that mess," she said. I liked her already. The next few weeks were quieter, but tense. I finally blocked Emma's number. My parents tried calling from different numbers, leaving long voicemails where my mom begged me to be the bigger person, and my dad guilt-tripped me about family values and how hard they worked to raise 2 daughters. I ignored them all. I didn't feel like the villain. I felt like someone who had finally walked out of a room I was never allowed to leave. What I didn't expect was what came next. My parents came home early from their cruise. I found out from a mutual cousin who said my mom was devastated and my dad was furious. Apparently, they had expected to return to a mended household. They thought my absence was a tantrum, not a final line. They believed I'd return to the role of fixer, mediator, responsible older daughter. Instead, they came home to silence. Emma, who had been couch surfing, wasn't speaking to them either. She blamed them for not forcing me to take her in. She told relatives I had emotionally abused her by making her feel unwanted, that I was cold, selfish, and cruel. And while my parents always used to defend her, I heard through that same cousin that now they were starting to turn on each other too. The Golden Child Act was wearing thin when they had to deal with her full-time without someone else to take the fallout. And me. I thrived. Work stabilized. HR closed the file. I got promoted to a senior position 2 months later. Lila renewed her room for another year and paid rent on time. My apartment became peaceful again. But more importantly, I no longer walked on eggshells. I no longer apologized for having boundaries. And slowly, I stopped feeling guilty for saying no. The final blow came in the form of a legal envelope. A lawyer, not even one I hired, reached out on behalf of Emma. She had filed a small claims court case for wrongful eviction, emotional distress, and personal damages. It was laughable. She had no case, no paperwork, no proof she had ever lived with me. Her claim was built on audacity and entitlement. My lawyer shut it down in a single hearing. I didn't even have to speak. She didn't show up to the court date. She texted me once after that. Just one word. Congratulations. I deleted it without reading further. Months passed. I heard less and less from my parents. Eventually, the voicemails stopped. They didn't come to my birthday. They didn't invite me for Thanksgiving. I wasn't surprised. They didn't want a daughter. They wanted a doormat, and I had finally stood up. A few nights ago, I found an old photo of me and Emma. We were maybe 10 and 8, arms thrown around each other in matching swimsuits at the lake. We were grinning like nothing in the world could touch us. I stared at it for a long time. I don't hate her. I really don't. I hate who she became, who they enabled her to be, and I mourn the relationship we could have had if someone had just told her no sooner. But I also know this. Choosing peace doesn't make you heartless. Choosing distance doesn't make you cruel. It just means you're done bleeding so someone else can stay comfortable. I tossed the photo in a drawer. I rarely open now. And then I went back to my quiet, calm, beautiful apartment and made myself a cup of tea. No more knocking. No more threats. Just silence. And for once, I didn't feel guilty about it. Not even a little. If you made it this far, then like the video and subscribe the channel more for tales. Thanks for watching.